I found out my dad had a secret family after he died. There are moments in life when everything you believe to be true shatters like glass dropped from a great height. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, sitting in a leather chair that smelled of old books and furniture polish, staring at a woman I'd never seen before. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My father was the kind of man people remembered. Not because he was particularly tall or handsome, though he had a certain charm about him, but because he had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. When he listened to you, he really listened. His eyes would focus on yours with an intensity that made you believe every word you said mattered. Growing up, I worshipped him. I was his little shadow, following him around our modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, asking endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how airplanes stayed in the air. He never brushed me off, never told me he was too busy. Instead, he'd sit down, sometimes pulling out a napkin to draw diagrams, and explain things in a way that made sense to my young mind. "The world is full of mysteries," he'd say in that gentle way of his. "Never stop asking questions." He taught me to ride a bicycle on a Saturday morning when I was 7. I can still remember the feeling of his hand on my back, steady and reassuring as I wobbled down our driveway. When I finally found my balance and he let go, I didn't even realize it at first. I just kept pedaling, the wind in my hair, feeling invincible. "You're doing it," he shouted behind me, his voice full of pride. "You're flying, kiddo!" That's how he made me feel, like I could fly. He was there for every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every scraped knee and broken heart. When I didn't make the volleyball team in 8th grade, he took me out for ice cream and told me that rejection was just redirection. "Sometimes the universe is protecting you from something that wasn't meant for you," he said, spooning chocolate chip mint into his mouth. "Trust the process." My mother was quieter than my father. Where he was all warmth and energy, she was calm and steady. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, often taking night shifts that meant she'd sleep during the day while I was at school. I understood even as a child that her work was important. She was saving lives. But it also meant that my father and I had a special bond. He worked from home as a consultant, something to do with business strategy that I never fully understood, which meant he had a flexible schedule. He was the one who packed my lunches, who helped with homework, who drove me to soccer practice and dance lessons. Looking back now, I realize how convenient that arrangement was, how it gave him the freedom to live another life entirely. The call came on a Thursday evening in February. I was at my apartment, 28 years old, and finally feeling like I had my life together. I'd just gotten a promotion at the marketing firm where I worked, and I was celebrating with takeout Thai food and a glass of wine when my phone rang. It was my mother, and I knew immediately something was wrong. Her voice had that hollow quality that comes with shock. "You need to come home. It's your father." The drive to my childhood home took 45 minutes, but it felt like hours. My mind raced through possibilities. An accident, an illness, something fixable. I wasn't prepared for what I found. My father had collapsed in his home office. Massive heart attack. The paramedics said he was likely gone before he hit the floor. He was 56 years old. The next few weeks passed in a blur of grief and logistics. There were funeral arrangements to make, relatives to notify, casseroles from neighbors who didn't know what else to do. My mother moved through it all with a strange mechanical efficiency that worried me. She didn't cry much, at least not in front of me. She just handled things. I, on the other hand, was a mess. I took leave from work and stayed at my childhood home, sleeping in my old bedroom with its faded purple walls and posters from high school. At night, I'd lie awake and replay memories, trying to hold on to every detail of my father's face, his voice, his laugh. The funeral was beautiful, if such a thing can be said. Hundreds of people came, colleagues, neighbors, friends from his college days. Person after person told me stories about my father's kindness, his generosity, his infectious optimism. Each story was a small comfort, a reminder that he'd touched many lives. But there was one woman at the funeral who caught my attention. She stood at the back of the church, partially hidden behind a pillar. She was probably in her early 50s with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. She didn't approach the casket, didn't join the receiving line. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, and then she left before the service ended. I mentioned her to my mother, but she just shook her head. "I don't know everyone your father knew through work," she said, her voice tight. 3 weeks after the funeral, I received a phone call from a law office I'd never heard of. A man with a professional, measured voice asked if I could come in for a meeting regarding my father's estate. "I think there's been a mistake," I told him. "My mother is handling all of that with our family lawyer." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I understand this may be unexpected, but there are matters that require your presence. Would next Tuesday at 2 o'clock work for you?" Something in his tone made me agree. The law office was in a part of town I rarely visited, tucked between a dry cleaner and a coffee shop in a nondescript brick building. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, my stomach churning with an anxiety I couldn't quite name. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, smiled at me. "The attorney is expecting you. Conference room B, just down the hall." I walked down a corridor lined with framed diplomas and certificates, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Through the glass door of conference room B, I could see a man in his 60s sitting at a large table, papers spread out before him. And I could see someone else. A woman, the same woman from the funeral, sat in one of the chairs, her hands folded in her lap. Next to her were two young people, a young man and a young woman, both probably in their mid-20s. My hand froze on the door handle. The attorney looked up and saw me. He stood, gesturing for me to enter. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." I entered the room on autopilot, my eyes darting between the three strangers. The woman looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, sadness maybe, or guilt. The two younger people just stared, their faces pale. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "I think I'm in the wrong meeting." "Please, sit down," the attorney said gently. "I know this is going to be difficult." I sat, my purse clutched in my lap like a shield. The attorney cleared his throat. "I've been your father's attorney for the past 15 years, handling certain private matters. Your father left very specific instructions about how his estate should be divided." "My mother already has a lawyer handling the estate," I said, confused. "Yes, I'm aware. He's handling the primary estate, the house, the joint accounts, the assets your mother is entitled to. I'm here regarding your father's secondary estate." "Secondary estate?" The woman across from me spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "These are my children, our children." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table. "I don't understand," I whispered. The attorney pulled out a document. "Your father maintained a separate household for the past 19 years. He provided financial support and was an active presence in the lives of these two young people. In his will, he specified that certain assets, a property in Riverside, investment accounts, and a life insurance policy should be divided equally among his 3 children. 3 children. The words echoed in my head, refusing to make sense. "That's not possible," I said, my voice rising. "My father wouldn't. He couldn't." But even as I said it, pieces were clicking into place. The business trips that seemed to happen every other weekend. The separate cell phone he said was for work. The way he'd sometimes seemed distracted, distant, like part of him was somewhere else. The young man, my half-brother, apparently spoke up. His voice was gentle, and I hated that he sounded kind. "We didn't know he hadn't told you. We thought you knew about us." "Knew about you?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "I didn't even know you existed." The young woman had tears in her eyes. "We have pictures of you," she said quietly. "Dad showed us photos. He talked about you all the time. He said you were our sister, that someday we'd all meet properly." I stood up so fast my chair fell backward. "This is insane. This is absolutely insane." The woman stood too, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "Please, I know this is a shock." "A shock." I laughed, and it came out harsh and bitter. "My father is dead, and now I find out he had an entire other family? That's not a shock. That's a complete destruction of everything I thought I knew." The attorney tried to interject. "I understand this is overwhelming." "You understand nothing," I snapped. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. "Wait," the woman called after me. But I was already gone, running down the hallway, down the stairs, out into the street where I could finally breathe. I sat in my car for 2 hours, parked in a random lot 3 blocks from the law office. I cried until I had no tears left, until my eyes were swollen and my throat was raw. Then I just sat there staring at nothing, trying to process the impossible. My father, my hero, my role model, the man I'd based my entire understanding of integrity and honesty on, had been living a lie. For 19 years, nearly my entire life. How was that even possible? How had he managed it? The logistics alone seemed impossible. 2 families, 2 homes, 2 completely separate lives. And my mother, did she know? I drove home in a daze, barely remembering the route. When I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I saw my mother's car. She was home from her shift. I found her in the kitchen making tea. She looked up when I entered, and something in my face must have told her everything. "You went to the meeting," she said. It wasn't a question. "You knew." My voice was flat, emotionless. "You knew about them." She set down the kettle carefully, her hands shaking slightly. "Sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me the truth. Did you know Dad had another family?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then finally she nodded. "I suspected. For years, the admission hit me like a physical blow." "You suspected? And you did nothing? What was I supposed to do?" she asked, and for the first time I heard anger in her voice. "Blow up our family? Destroy your childhood? Make you choose between your parents? You could have told me the truth. You were a child, and then you were a teenager, and then you were building your own life. When was the right time? When would it have hurt less?" I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "How long have you known?" She sat down across from me, her tea forgotten. I started suspecting about 10 years ago. Little things that didn't add up. Receipts from restaurants we'd never been to. Charges on credit cards I didn't recognize. He was always so careful, but occasionally he'd slip up. Why didn't you confront him? I did. Once, about 8 years ago. She stared at her hands. He denied everything. Said I was being paranoid, that the stress of my job was making me imagine things. And I wanted to believe him. So I did. But you knew. Deep down you knew. Yes, she whispered. I knew. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, I could hear children playing in a neighbor's yard, their laughter a stark contrast to the heaviness in our kitchen. Did you love him? I finally asked. Even knowing what he was doing? My mother's eyes filled with tears. Yes, God help me, yes. That's the worst part, isn't it? That you can love someone even when they're breaking your heart. I couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with understanding how my father had managed his double life. I went through his things, his office, his files, his computer. My mother didn't stop me. I think she wanted to know, too. What I found was a masterclass in deception. He had 2 separate phones, as I'd suspected. 2 email accounts. 2 calendars meticulously maintained to ensure the 2 worlds never collided. He'd told the other woman, I couldn't bring myself to think of her as his other wife, though apparently they'd had some kind of commitment ceremony, that he traveled for work. He told us the same thing. The truth was he rarely traveled at all. He just alternated between 2 homes, 2 families, 2 lives. I found receipts for birthday presents I'd never seen him give. Report cards for children I'd never known existed. Photos of family vacations to places he'd told us he'd gone for business conferences. In a locked drawer in his desk, I found a journal. My hands shook as I opened it. The entries were sporadic, written over the course of years. In them, my father wrestled with his choices, his guilt, his love for both families. He wrote about the impossibility of choosing, about how he'd gotten in too deep to find a way out. One entry, dated 3 years ago, particularly gutted me. My daughter asked me today what I thought made a good person. She's applying to graduate schools and writing an essay about ethics and integrity. I told her that good people are honest, that they keep their promises, that they live according to their values. I am such a hypocrite. But how do I tell her the truth now? How do I destroy everything she believes about me? About our family? I've built this house of cards, and I'm terrified that if I try to dismantle it, everyone I love will be buried in the rubble. Sometimes I think about just disappearing, starting over somewhere new where I wouldn't have to lie anymore. But I can't leave them. Any of them. I love them all too much. I'm trapped in a prison of my own making, and I don't know how to escape. I closed the journal and cried. Because despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies, I could hear my father's voice in those words. I could feel his pain, his conflict, his impossible situation, and I hated that I still loved him. Part 6. The Meeting. 2 months after that first disastrous meeting at the lawyer's office, I received a text from an unknown number. Hi. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I was wondering if you'd be willing to meet for coffee. No pressure. I just thought maybe we could talk. It was from my half-sister. I stared at the message for a long time. My first instinct was to delete it, to block the number, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But curiosity won out. Or maybe it was something else, a need to understand, to find some piece of my father in these strangers who shared his blood. I agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown that I'd never been to before. Somewhere with no memories attached. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table. She stood when she saw me, and I was struck by how much she looked like my father. She had his eyes, that same warm brown with flecks of gold. His smile, tentative and hopeful. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either, I admitted. We ordered coffee. She got a latte, I got black coffee, just like my father used to drink, and sat in awkward silence for a moment. I don't know where to start, she finally said. Me neither. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. It was of her and her brother as children, maybe 8 and 10 years old, standing with our father at what looked like an amusement park. They were all smiling, cotton candy in hand. This was taken at Six Flags, she said. It was my 8th birthday. Dad took us for the whole day. It's one of my favorite memories. I looked at the date on the photo. I would have been 12. I tried to remember what I'd been doing that day, but couldn't. He told us about you all the time, she continued. He showed us pictures, told us stories about your accomplishments. When you graduated from college, he was so proud. He showed everyone your graduation photo. But he didn't come to my graduation, I said, the memory suddenly sharp. He said he had a work emergency. Her face fell. That was my brother's high school graduation. Same weekend. Of course it was. Did you know? I asked. That he was lying to us? To everyone? She nodded slowly. We knew he had another family. Mom told us when we were young. She said Dad loved us very much, but he had responsibilities to you and your mother, too. She made it sound almost normal, like it was just the way things were. How is that normal? I asked, my voice rising slightly. How did you just accept that? We didn't have a choice, she said quietly. It was the only father we knew, and he was a good father to us. He came to our school events, helped with homework, taught my brother to drive. He was there. He was there for me, too, I said. That's what makes this so impossible to understand. How is he there for all of us? I don't know, she admitted. I've been trying to figure that out myself. We talked for 2 hours that day. She told me about growing up knowing she had a half-sister she'd never met. About the strange double life they'd lived, where their father would disappear for days at a time and then reappear as if nothing had happened. About the questions they'd learned not to ask. I told her about my childhood, about the father I'd known, or thought I'd known. About the bike rides and the ice cream trips and the unwavering support. And slowly, painfully, we began to piece together a picture of a man who had somehow managed to be fully present in 2 places at once, who had loved 2 families completely, even as he betrayed them both. After that first meeting with my half-sister, I agreed to meet my half-brother as well. We met at a park walking along a trail as we talked. He was quieter than his sister, more reserved. But he had our father's mannerisms, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, the way he gestured with his hands when he got excited about something. I'm studying engineering, he told me as we walked. Dad helped me with my college applications. He was really good at math. He helped me with my applications too, I said. I remember him staying up late with me editing my essays. Same, he said with a sad smile. I guess he had a lot of practice. We walked in silence for a while, watching ducks paddle across a pond. Are you angry at him? He finally asked. I thought about it. Yes and no, and yes again. It changes every day, sometimes every hour. Yeah, he said. Same. Did you love him? I asked. Of course, he said immediately. Then he paused. But I'm also angry that he put us in this position, that he made choices that meant we couldn't all be together, that he died before we could ever be a real family. We're not a family, I said, more harshly than I intended. He looked at me and I saw hurt flash across his face. Maybe not. But we're connected whether we like it or not. We share DNA. We share a father. We share grief. He was right, of course, but I wasn't ready to admit it yet. Over the next few months, I met with my half-siblings several more times, sometimes together, sometimes separately. Each meeting was easier than the last, though never easy. I learned that my half-brother wanted to be an architect, that he played guitar, that he was dating someone he'd met in his physics class. I learned that my half-sister was studying to be a teacher, that she volunteered at an animal shelter, that she made terrible jokes that somehow always made me laugh. I learned that they were good people, kind people, people I might have been friends with under different circumstances. And I learned that they were grieving too. They'd lost their father just as I had. The fact that he'd been living a lie didn't make their grief any less real. The hardest person to face was her, the other woman. I'd avoided her after that first meeting, unable to reconcile my anger at the situation with the fact that she was, in many ways, as much a victim as my mother and I were. But finally, 6 months after my father's death, I agreed to meet her. We met at her house, the house my father had bought for her, the house he'd lived in part-time for 19 years. It was in a quiet neighborhood about 40 minutes from where I'd grown up. A nice house, well-maintained, with a garden in the front yard. She answered the door herself. Up close, I could see the lines around her eyes, the gray threading through her dark hair. She looked tired. Thank you for coming, she said, stepping aside to let me in. The house was warm, lived in. Photos covered the walls, photos of my half-siblings at various ages, photos of her and my father together, smiling. I had to look away. We sat in her living room, tea between us that neither of us touched. I know you must hate me, she said finally. I don't hate you, I said, and was surprised to find it was true. I don't know what I feel about you. I never meant to hurt anyone, she said. I know that sounds hollow, but it's true. How did it start? I asked. How did you end up in this situation? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea. I met your father at a conference. I was working in event planning at the time. He was charming, funny, attentive. We started talking, and it just clicked. Did you know he was married? Not at first. He didn't wear a ring. He never mentioned a family. By the time I found out, I was already in love with him. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading for understanding. I know that's not an excuse. I should have walked away. But he told me his marriage was over, that he was only staying for his daughter, that he was planning to leave. But he never did. No. And then I got pregnant, and everything got more complicated. He said he couldn't leave you, that you needed him, but he also couldn't leave us, so he split himself in half. For 19 years. For 19 years, she confirmed, and I let him. I convinced myself that half of him was better than none of him, that my children deserved to have their father in their lives, even if it was only part-time. Did you ever ask him to choose? Once, when my daughter was 5, I told him he needed to make a decision, either commit to us fully or let us go so we could move on. She smiled bitterly. He cried. He said he loved us all too much to choose. That choosing would destroy him. And I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to believe him. My mother suspected, I told her. She never said anything, but she knew. She nodded. I always wondered. Your father said she didn't know, but I had my doubts. It's hard to hide something like that completely. Why didn't you ever reach out to her? To us? What would I have said? She asked. How do you start that conversation? She had a point. Do you regret it? I asked. The whole thing? She thought about it for a long time. I regret the pain it's caused. I regret that my children grew up with a part-time father. I regret that you had to find out this way. But do I regret loving your father? Do I regret having my children? No, I can't regret that. I understood. It was the same impossible contradiction I was living with, hating what my father had done while still loving who he was. A year after my father's death, I found myself at a cemetery on a Sunday afternoon. Not the cemetery where he was buried. I still couldn't bring myself to visit his grave, but a different one, quieter, where I could think. I'd been seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma. She'd helped me understand that grief and anger could coexist, that I didn't have to choose between loving my father and acknowledging his betrayal. People are complex, she'd told me in one of our sessions. They can be wonderful and terrible at the same time. Your father's actions don't erase the good memories you have, but the good memories don't excuse his actions either. Both things can be true. It was a hard truth to accept, but I was working on it. My phone buzzed. A text from my half-sister. My brother and I are getting together for lunch next Sunday. Want to join us? I stared at the message. A year ago, I would have deleted it immediately. 6 months ago, I might have made an excuse. But now? Sure, I typed back. Where and when? The lunch was surprisingly pleasant. We met at a casual restaurant, ordered too much food, and talked about everything except our father. My half-brother told funny stories about his roommates. My half-sister showed us pictures from her recent trip to the coast. I talked about a project at work that was driving me crazy. For a few hours, we were just 3 people in their 20s enjoying a meal together. The weight of our shared history was still there, but it felt lighter somehow. As we were leaving, my half-sister hugged me. It was the first time we'd hugged, and it felt both strange and natural. I'm glad you came, she said. Me too, I admitted. 2 years after my father's death, I finally visited his grave. I went alone, early in the morning when the cemetery was quiet. The headstone was simple, just his name and dates. My mother had chosen it, and I wondered if the other woman had wanted any input, if she'd even been invited to the funeral planning. I sat on the grass next to the grave and talked to him. I told him about my promotion at work, about the apartment I'd just bought, about the person I'd been dating. I told him about getting to know my half-siblings, about how strange and painful and occasionally wonderful it was. And then I told him I was angry, that I felt betrayed, that I didn't know if I could ever fully forgive him for the lies, for the deception, for the impossible situation he'd left us all in. But I also told him I loved him, that I missed him, that despite everything, he'd been a good father to me in many ways. I just wish you'd been honest, I said to the headstone. I wish you'd trusted us enough to tell the truth. Maybe we could have figured something out. Maybe it would have been messy and complicated, but at least it would have been real. The stone, of course, didn't answer. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun rise higher in the sky, listening to birds sing in the trees. And slowly I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but maybe the beginning of acceptance. My father had been deeply flawed. He'd made choices that hurt everyone who loved him. But he'd also been human, complicated, contradictory, capable of both great love and great selfishness. And maybe, just maybe, I could learn to hold both of those truths at the same time. 3 years after my father's death, my half-siblings and I met for coffee, something we'd started doing monthly. We'd developed our own relationship, separate from our shared connection to our father. We weren't quite siblings in the traditional sense, but we weren't strangers either. We were something in between, something we were still defining. I've been thinking, my half-sister said, stirring sugar into her latte, about Dad's journal, the one you found. I'd shared some of the entries with them, the ones that seemed relevant to all of us. What about it? I asked. He wrote about feeling trapped, about not knowing how to escape the situation he'd created. She looked at both of us. I think he was a coward in some ways, but I also think he genuinely didn't know what to do. That doesn't excuse it, my half-brother said. No, she agreed, but maybe it helps explain it. We sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our own thoughts. I talked to Mom about it, I said finally, about whether she would have stayed if he told her the truth. What did she say? My half-sister asked. She said she didn't know, that she'd like to think she would have left, but she's not sure. She said love makes people do irrational things. Like staying with someone who's living a double life, my half-brother said. Or sharing someone you love with another family, my half-sister added. Or trying to build a relationship with the half-siblings you never knew you had, I finished. We all smiled at that, sad but genuine smiles. We're all just pieces of him, my half-brother said quietly. Trying to make sense of what he left behind? It was true. We each carried parts of our father, his eyes, his smile, his mannerisms, his flaws. We were living proof of his complexity, his capacity for both love and deception. And maybe that was okay. Maybe we didn't need to fully understand him or forgive him or condemn him. Maybe we just needed to accept that he was human, flawed, and complicated, and that we were allowed to feel all of our contradictory emotions about him. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the man my father had been. Not the hero I'd imagined as a child, not the villain I'd wanted to make him after learning the truth, but something more nuanced. A man who had loved deeply and failed spectacularly. A man who had tried to be everything to everyone and ended up hurting them all. I thought about the family he'd left behind. Not one family, but three. My mother still processing her own complicated grief. The other woman raising two children who missed their father. And my half-siblings and me trying to forge something meaningful from the wreckage. It wasn't the family any of us had imagined. It wasn't neat or simple or easy, but it was ours in all its messy, complicated reality. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.